Aquí Leis Curbero en otro episodio de Command Z, but this time it's Command C Open the Files. Open the File is a series about opening design process that usually stay invisible. You know the designers we like to show in case just the pretty stuff. Not in this case, not in this podcast. We will show in the draft, the negotiations, technical decisions, and ethical questions that don't show up at final outputs. I want to say thank you to the collaboration with Sur Global. Sur Global is a nonprofit civil association which works to democratize knowledge and promote responsible and inclusive innovation across Latin America and other countries of the global south. Based in Lima, Peru, but operating remotely from multiple cities around the world. Sur Global focuses on reducing the digital divide and empowering creatives, designers, entrepreneurs, and innovators who have been historically marginalized. We are together on this because we believe in the creative process and how conversations like this one can move the needle towards collaboration for social justice. Just so you know. So, how is this dynamic of open files? So, you can join us and actually participate with us in this file. So, just click, take a photo, just put that QR code open, and just start playing with us in this open file. Today with us, Kevin King. Today's conversation is about letters, fun, and design, but also about power. Who gets to write their language digitally? Do you have that question before? And what kind of design work happens before letter even appears on a keyboard? We are talking to Kevin King, a type designer and researcher who works includes supporting indigenous languages through typography, Unicode proposals, and long-term collaborations. Kevin will be walking through a specific project, the addition of Helsinki language. I hope that I say it correctly. If not, Kevin will tell me. That is a language characters to Unicode, a work that connects community language revitalization, deep technical systems, and global tech platforms like Apple and Microsoft. We explore this work from different angles and take deep dive into nerdy behind the scenes, the social and collaborative process of trust and transcultural design work. So, without further ado, welcome Kevin King. Welcome, Kevin, to
Hey,
Command C Open Files.
thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm happy to be here,
I'm
Leishi.
I'm super excited to have you here. Like I'm been following your work, and it's just amazing work, man.
Oh, thank you so much.
I
Yeah, I really
will
appreciate
like
it.
to start with the first sharing file. We're
Okay.
about to open your files, but before that, I want to know about who's Kevin. What Kevin does besides just letters.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm excited to talk about this today because of course it's really important to me, not just professionally, but also just personally. This kind of work that has a lot of meaning. And you said in your introduction, which was lovely, by the way, it really set up, I think, what I'm going to share about today quite nicely because, indeed, often, for example, if we speak a language like English, Spanish, French, German, we don't think very much about. In fact, we just kind of take it for granted that that I could pick up a smartphone or a tablet or a computer of any kind, and I can just start. I can pick my Spanish keyboard, my Portuguese or English keyboard, and I can just start using it. And I don't even think about, oh, I'm missing a letter, or this isn't the. I might have things on my keyboard that don't show up on in the fonts that I have. So that's I'm excited to share more about that and dig into that. But about myself, so I'm a font designer and a researcher at Typotech, and Typotech is a type design studio based in The Hague in the Netherlands. Um, and Typotech's like a typical type foundry where there's a lot of retail work and custom font work, but the company also maintains a really strong mandate on doing work that has social impact. So to be involved in social change, and of course, being that we make fonts, um, that brings us into the conversation of language support. And we work with my space of work focuses on North American or Indigenous languages in North America, Canada, and the United States. But Tipotech works with people all over the world, under resourced language communities all over the world. So my work focuses on doing that, uh, that retail font work, like typical font design work for the library that we have, and also custom font design projects for clients. But also a lot of my other time is split up working on this research work with First Nations and Inuit communities. Um, I got into doing this work um, when I went to do my master's degree at the University of Reading at in the Masters of Type Design program, and the focus was on uh, engaging in work like this. So, in working with part of the mandate was working on designing a typeface for a language that you can't read or a writing system that you can't
Mm.
read. For myself, coming from Canada to study there for the year, I was curious to try to learn more actually about the syllabics, Inuktitut syllabics and Cree syllabics in particular. And so, in going through that process, learning about how do you actually build a research methodology to work with community members. At that time, I didn't work with community. That's something that I learned a lot about during the time studying there and then applied in practice after graduation. And so I'm grateful to be working with Typotech because Typotech's a company that supports this work, not just not just kind of saying that they support the work, but Typotech as a company actually allocates resources from the revenue of the company to make this work possible. And
That's
so,
really nice.
yeah, I'm excited to, and I'll be able to share like little bits and pieces about how how Typotech supports the work as I go along.
It's not only like beautiful letters, it's more than
Mm.
that. And one of the things that you mentioned that it really popped up in my head is like I just imagine when I would start like working on environments that are not in my language. I work in some offices that are in English, and I remember trying to change like the keywords, so like the acentos, like
Oh yeah.
the accents in Spanish doesn't
Mm.
show up or show up in the keyword. I was struggling trying to learn English and having like my keyword in Spanish and trying to change
Oh.
it. And I just can't imagine like actually having a language that the letters or the characters are not even there or not even like part of the system. So that's
Mhm.
why we want to start open your file, Kevin. So what actually happens under the hood? Like what is your
Yeah.
work? Tell us more about.
Yeah. So, in regards to font design, so I think that actually what you're describing there is really important and connected because what we end up dealing with a lot of is language enablement because language is something that's separate from it's in fact separate from writing. I know that there are many oral only cultures, and then there are cultures that oral is very important, but there's also writing. But even if writing is very very important in a culture, the oral language um, is always something that you'll have even if you don't have writing, as long as people are speaking. But when it comes to a digitally connected world, we really rely on being able to use our language dynamically, both not just for like let's say economic reasons, like for work, um, but also for communication, like sending emails and text messages, and if we want to engage in social media, you can like anybody can access those things if they have if they have a device, which is maybe even another question, like can you access the device? Maybe it costs too much. um, but if you do get your hands on the device, then can you actually access your language? And then even if you have those tools on the device, can you actually use your writing system on Facebook, let's say, as an example, or any platform? Can you design, like if we're designers, we're speaking about design, can you actually open up Adobe apps and can you actually use your language? Because what we'll start to look at is you might be able to actually um, have a keyboard, you might be able to have a font that supports your language, but the platform might not necessarily support the rendering of the language properly. So you've got all the pieces, but you've met a roadblock because you can't go further than that because you can't rewrite Adobe Illustrator necessarily. Be quite a task. So what goes on under the hood of fonts? I'm gonna grab an image. So
Show
yeah,
us.
yeah, we got to actually start seeing some stuff. I know. So what I wanted to actually say quickly is that was speaking about from my own context. So I'm gonna load in something in, and I'll make this smaller. So in North America, there are a lot of languages that use a Latin script. So we think about scripts and languages, but there are also other writing systems. Cherokee was the first writing system designed by an Indigenous person, Sequoia. And then there are the syllabics writing systems. And I particularly work a lot with those. And then the Osage script, which is actually quite new. But within that space, so it's North North America is an incredibly linguistically diverse place, just like all of the Americas. But within that space, it's also very typographically diverse too. What you see here, these are all these. This is just a snapshot of all of the orthographies that are present within First Nations and Inuit language communities in North America, across North America, across the different writing systems. So there's a Latin script writing system, and sometimes there are just writing systems that are characters with a few diacritics that you might also find shared in French, uh, which is common. But there are also a lot of them that are based on mixtures of phonetic writing systems like the International Phonetic Alphabet and an Americanist style of phonetic notation. So you see Greek letters sometimes in there, and you'll see characters that aren't used to seeing in a typical, in what you would see in like a European-based writing system, and a lot of diacritic mark usage because of how complex the phonology of the languages are. And then you see other writing systems that are totally unique, like Cherokee, of course, and Osage, and the syllabics. So, like this one you see here. And even within the syllabics, there's quite a lot of diversity, typographically speaking, there. So, what that means is, again, we're focusing on a lens of what's going on in typographically, but from a language enablement and access point of view, uh, what we actually realize is that there's a lot going on that a font designer needs to be thinking about when they're working a font. And some of that stuff is, I'm going to pull something else in here, some of that stuff is really this dynamic that I'm going to show you here. We're making digital fonts, and all of the fonts that we use on a smartphone, a tablet, a computer rely on an interface between a digital text encoding standard and then our devices being able to comply to that standard, which is hypothetically not too difficult. It just has to have, the Unicode is that standard. And then we have to have some method. So we're talking about this bottom tier. So we would call it Unicode text. It's your alphabet, it's your writing system in Unicode. And then when you move up to the second area, you have to have a way to then access the Unicode characters and put them onto the device. And that might be like composing a text message. You could be also writing an essay in Word, or you might be on a web page writing an email. Unicode text is really your keyboard, or maybe speech to text if your language has that support. And then whether I'm speaking into the device or whether I'm typing it in, which is the most common, what the keyboard is allowing me to do is actually just select these codes, which represent these characters you see. And what you actually see is that a keyboard only puts in raw Unicode elements like this. A font's job, and that's where my job comes in, my responsibility is to take this input, this raw input, and then give you what you see in the blue area. And that's both the assembly of those characters, but also the styling then of the characters. When we get into the styling side of things, then that's where we get into letter drawing. And what I have to do is I have to be cognizant of the fact that I grew up learning design from a European-centric lens. And there are incredible design traditions in a European-based context, but I also have to be aware of the fact that within First Nations communities, within this space that I'm working in, the reason why I can't just go and look at the books and examples of characters for how they would expect, those communities would expect their characters to be drawn, is because I need to actually speak to people so I can understand, are the characters being represented in your fonts, in fonts that are available correctly? And that's both, does it actually assemble the text correctly? That's like level one. And then the second level is, does it look graphically and culturally appropriate? Those two elements are where have to have community-based collaborative working arrangements. And so I'm gonna pop that down.
You
And so
know,
really yeah,
no, go on.
yeah. And so what that means is, I'm gonna throw something up here really quickly. So what that would mean is, if I'm actually looking at, like, let's say that I'm a health book reader, like Jess,
Oh.
and I'm trying to read my language on any application. These turquoise commas are actually a glottal stop. If I'm reading on a smartphone, on a computer, can I actually type these characters? That's step number one, if they're in Unicode. I'm going to share more about how we had to actually ask the Unicode standard to add new characters for Jess's language, health. But then the other thing is, does the system actually render the characters properly? Like, what a lot of health readers see is the bottom line here, where the characters actually crash. The font
That
is
happens a lot.
responsible. I know, and it's brutal, because like this just renders things unusable. If I didn't highlight this in turquoise, you couldn't even, like, it would look like a blob down here. I've got another example that will help illustrate this point. My colleague, let me see here. There, this one. So for example, this is on Blue Sky.
Oh.
And when we were successful in getting the new characters added to Unicode and they were published, we made a video, which I'd be happy to share the links with Leishi, and everybody can have a look at that
Yes.
video. What you actually see going on here is that this is on the Mac OS. And this is the stock font on Mac, like the core font, because that's what you'll tend to see your social media text represented in. But for Nahingaino, she's not actually able to see both two things here. The diacritics, these are the glottal marks. If you compare these two examples, the marks that are rendered in orange should actually look distinctly like this ball and a tail comma. And the marks that you see in green should look like an acute accent, like in French and other languages that would use this. It's the exact same graphic symbol, but two things are happening here. There's a confusion between these marks, but they're also not even stacking above the character. They're not, and they're doing something that's typical. If a font doesn't have the anchoring, I'll see if I can find a diagram that'll show that nicely. But if the font doesn't have these attachment points, it'll actually push it over to the side like this. So it's two things. The mark looks just like the acute, and even if they were rendering, it wouldn't look properly, but they're not even stacking together. So font's responsible for being able to handle both how should something look so it can be read, and how should something then be output that's in a graphic way that's culturally appropriate for the readership, really. And yeah,
I love that you mentioned like accessible. Like, I
Mhm.
mean, I'm a freak about accessibility, but when you talk about devices, like some people think accessibility just for people that have some kind of disabilities, but accessibility is also taking into consideration the access to devices, the access to languages, like the access to communication. That's also
Yeah,
accessibility. And I love that you
exactly.
mentioned also like cultural appropriation, like how we can create
Mm,
designs that actually respect those cultural things, because it's not only, again, we are open this file to talk about, it's not only pretty things, are things that actually works for everyone, like being
exactly.
accessible.
Yeah, you make a really good point because the other thing that I should say is that, like, myself and any other font designer, I can't just go in and fix this problem that exists on a core font for, and this would be for any major platform. Like, this is for Apple, but it could be for Microsoft, it could be for Google Android devices. When it gets to the device level, there's kind of a barrier where a third-party researcher and designer, like, so this font that you see on the bottom is a font called November that Typotech we publish. And we provide these fonts for free to the communities. Like, the Heltzo community didn't pay for this font and many others that we made for them. They can use the fonts on their computer, and that's fine. On a desktop computer, that's okay. But on your smartphone, you have to see text rendered through this lens, through this font. What's going on here on a technical level for those who are interested is that the font either doesn't have an anchor that's telling these marks to attach above letters, or there might be something in the platform, so something in the app or the software where the anchor support is turned off for some reason. Um, and really, what it means is that we need to advocate as we're a third party company. We can advocate through companies by making documentation or public
Mm-hmm.
writing about it, and just saying, like, we can make issue reports as well, um, to request uh, updates to the font so that this language can be supported appropriately. And then the other thing is that's understandable, though, on a, like, if we think about a company, even like a third party software developer who needs to support a certain geographic region, their languages, if they don't know how that should look, it's understandable that it would be hard for them to make their product to work, to have it work appropriately. So partially what we're helping and doing in collaboration with the communities is we're working together to make sure that we get it right, and that it's the community is able to specify and say this is how things should work and look. And then with that, we can put that knowledge up publicly, and it can be shared so that other parties, such as these big tech companies, but also even like third party app developers, can also implement the accurate support. um, because it's really important to have it so that there's a kind of a standard that people can work off of.
Definitely. And I love that
Yeah.
you mentioned documentation because some designers are more involved in documentation. Like, I don't know, myself as a UX designer are more
Yeah.
involved in documentation, but other disciplines sometimes doesn't then think about documentation. And it
Hmm.
for me it's new. I mean, I can think about that typography also do documentation, but for me it's new hearing from somebody that actually do the work. We need to documentate. We need to actually create a structure for other type designers. So
Hmm.
tell us a little bit more in terms of the process of the Unicode. I
Yeah.
love that you have some things over here, but that was me actually doing a research about you.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Can you
So
walk
here,
us through the technical layers? Not me just putting files, your files.
yeah, yeah. No, thank you. I'd be happy to do that. So, what I should say is that I'm going to talk to you about the Heltsuk work that we did together, and I didn't just do this alone. So I did this with a team of researchers, and I'll introduce my research team after I quickly introduce about a Unicode proposal and
Nice.
what it contains. But so this work doesn't just happen with me and the communities. I've got a wonderful team that I work collaboratively with that Tipotech pays. Well, not just myself, but also a team. Um, so the Unicode standards something that was developed in the early 1990s, or at least it was published in the early 1990s. And it was an initiative to try to get some kind of global text standard. If our characters are not inside the Unicode standard, because all of our devices are complying to that Unicode standard, there's no way for us to get a reliable way to have a text interchange or exchange. So with the Heltso community, let me find a nice way to bring this up. So with the Heltso community, A Unicode proposal, really, if we want to talk about it, what has to go into a Unicode proposal, we really need to know about a few things. What's missing?
Mm-hmm.
Why might it be missing? But more importantly, we need to basically, like, a Unicode proposal needs to explain to Unicode's technical committee, who is responsible for maintaining the Unicode standard, and that means accepting new characters or not accepting them. But they need that body is not like they're very open and easy to talk to. Actually, there's a working group called the Script and Coding Committee, which is a subcommittee that will help any community work through characters that are missing or issues that they might be experiencing. You can table a draft proposal and say, we're having trouble with the input or encoding for our orthography, we're missing pieces. And so what they will do is they will try to see, like, what would be the best solution for you. Does it mean adding new characters or not? And so what you would present in a Unicode proposal.
I'm
I'm gonna
curious. It's like
Yeah,
they are accepting more letters. I mean, it's a silly way to put it out, but it's
yeah,
based. They're
yeah.
accepting new letters.
They are, and I think so. Like, here's a quick screenshot from the proposal that we worked on, and this is sort of this would be the summary page that you would drop in. This is a little snapshot, and I can share the link to the actual proposal. Can I put that
That
in the
would be
chat?
cool. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm gonna
Please.
drop it in there. Um,
I think you can paste it also in the canvas. Let me see. Let me see.
oh, let's see. Oh, yeah. Wait, is that okay?
Did you put over here? Oh
I think I
yes.
put it as a comment. Okay, okay. So that's a link to the proposal for anybody who wants to look at it, because it's exhaustive in the sense that it has to really explain that, because it's not like a light thing to add new characters to Unicode, because once they're in there, and because the standard has to have this integrity of backwards and forwards compatibility. It's not very easy to take things out of the Unicode standard. Characters can be deprecated if it's clear that they shouldn't be used by anybody, so they can be sort of flagged and retired, but they'll still be in Unicode.
Hmm.
I'm not the right person to speak about the process of character deprecation, but I do know about adding characters, and
Interesting. You can retire characters.
sort of, yeah. But I think that Unicode Technical Committee is very careful to make sure that they're going through all the cases and trying to understand, like, are there other languages, writing systems that might use these characters? So the health sub community were missing two capital letters, A7DA and A7DC. So
Hmm.
we and I'll explain why we had to add a new A7DB lambda for the Latin script. And that has to do with capital to lowercase case conversion. But so essentially, what the health sub community were missing was these. I'll show you. This is from 1984.
Oh.
It was written completely in a typewriter. So the health sub community had a man
Oh.
named John Rath. He's a Dutch linguist who was invited to go to Bella Bella, BC in the mid to late 70s, and he helped them, working together with elders and documenting the phonology of the language. They sat together. There's a video that I'll look up while we're going, and you can actually see him doing that work with the community. I think it was called it's National Film Board of Canada film from
Interesting.
that
So this is
time.
a typewriter. So
Yeah, and so that means that the typewriter was actually here's that link. They don't show the typewriter, unfortunately, but it shows him working with the elders and the fluent language speakers.
hmm.
What John Rath was doing was he was developing a revised orthography. They had an earlier orthography, and they wanted to sort of make sense of what was the language like today at the time in the late 70s. and then they were developing a new orthography. So their orthography existed here, and it's always existed in this state from the late 70s until today. Before these capital letters that you see, they're like a flipped. You could graphically think of them like a flipped Y. This one here. Oh, I guess I can do this. This one and this one. These two are missing from Unicode. Unicode had this one, and this is a lowercase to this one.
Mm.
And I actually don't know if they have the regular lambda. I don't have an example of that, but there was a lowercase pair for this as well. This typewriter was basically hacked together in Vancouver. So there were typewriter repair shops who could customize these typewriters. And you could even hire like a Remington company. You could say, I need a typewriter, but this is the language, and they'll, fabricate the punches. They would make the typewriter for you if you had the money to pay. Again, if you had the money to buy
Mm.
a customized typewriter,
It's not
which
accessible for everyone at that time.
exactly. And you know what? It's interesting because metal type, also the typewriter, and our digital devices share a lot in common. Because it, like, a computer is not a cheap thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's actually not a cheap thing. It's like thousands
It's
of
not.
dollars. A smartphone might be a bit more accessible, and in fact, a lot of First Nations and Inuit communities use smartphones more often than they use a tablet, especially if you're someone who doesn't have to do a lot of desk work with a computer. Like if you're doing a lot of land-based work, you just need a
Mm-hmm.
smartphone, but you still need to be able to write your language. So, but even so, like, let's say you can get access to that, but it's still a financial investment. But you're paying the same money that other people pay, you just can't use your language. So that's like, it's not just that it's not fair. It's so many levels of wrong.
Yep.
So it's expensive, and just like a typewriter was expensive, so the communities would have had these devices on hand, but maybe one. The community could feasibly have one. I actually don't know. I'd have to ask some of my colleagues in Bella Bella, which is their community, the Healthswick community, if they had more than one. That's possible, but they probably didn't have very many. So probably people were writing stuff down by hand a lot. But the typewriter was actually effectively just a typesetting device, because this book was printed directly from the typewritten manuscript, and somebody would have marked this up with a ruler, or like a ruling pen, carefully. They would have laid out the page and then took a high-res photograph, printed the
Mm-hmm.
book from printing plates. So on that typewriter, they had their orthography completely supported. And just because these two characters you see circled here were not in Unicode, it doesn't mean that their orthography would, or their language didn't exist. It just means that Unicode didn't yet have a way to input these characters. And Unicode is really great. Like when we went to them, this was, I think, my third Unicode proposal that I worked on.
Nice.
Um,
And
and yeah,
it was a proposal just for those three.
yeah, just for these three characters that we see
Wow.
here. So what goes into a proposal is trying to make a case of, look, there's actually a historical precedent to these characters. This is their orthography. Um, it might be a little bit different too if a community was, like, let's say, trying to add characters today, or like even 10 years ago. The Healthswick community's orthography has been used since the 70s. So like that's almost like pushing a century,
Mm-hmm.
actually, if you think about it, because it is. And so the whole issue there is that it's been used for so long that, and they even had digital examples. If you look through this proposal, there were early digital fonts that were kind of, on an encoding basis, they were hacked together. But they were still trying to have digital fonts in a contemporary sense. Now that they have these characters, it enables the ability to use the language in a healthier way, more widespread way. What I want to do is say, I want to rewind just slightly and introduce my team, because my lovely team, and I want to introduce who I worked with as well. So, um, in with Typotech's work, we work together as a team of researchers. So I'm just one of four members of this wonderful team. So Professor Mark Turin, University of British Columbia. Mark, in fact, is who I reached out to originally when we started doing. When I noticed that these characters were missing, I thought I need to speak to somebody who would know more about it. And when I spoke to Mark, he connected me originally with the Healthsook Revitalization Department in their local government band office, and then we took it from there. And this is actually how we started to assemble this team. So Mark and I also work together with Bridget Chase, who's a wonderful language technologist, but also a brilliant uh, manager of all of the different moving parts that go on in language work. Um, and Clarissa Forbes, who's a linguist and language technologist. So Clarissa does work everything from database level, but also to keyboard work. And Clarissa is a linguist as well, who works in different communities in British Columbia locally. And together we form a group of four who take on work with the Hautsa community, but also with, we're working actively with several other First Nations, Inuit communities. And that work's ongoing. I hope that we can share that soon as well with everybody. But so the work doesn't just happen with me, it happens with this lovely team from our side on the Typotech side. And on the language work side,
I love that it's not a one man show. It's like a
oh yeah,
collaboration between too many people that have knowledge, like that have actually the information to gather and collaborate. Like this is really important. Sometimes designers we work so in solo mode,
mhm,
and it's so important perspectives and collaboration in general.
exactly. Yeah, and so it's really, I'm going to share, this is the quick image that I have. But so I worked, we worked closely with Nahingaino, or Robin, in the Healthsook community. Robin Nahingaino is a uh, language technologist working in Bella Bella, who worked with the language department and on behalf of the language commission. And so Nahingaino and I worked together to gather all of the evidence of the characters. So this historical evidence, also
Nice.
looking at the different eras, and we had to go through and prepare the case to say, this is what we're struggling with, this is what we need. One of the big issues that Nahingaino and I worked with is this. So it's pretty easy to put the capital letters that you saw outlined here. So like these characters, um, this one, and in fact, this one that looks like a flipped Y with a bar through it. It's called the Running Man character. It's kind of like a local term in
Mm.
Pacific Northwest First Nations languages. That one was easy because there was already the lowercase in Unicode. So um, if I have a look at this page here, like actually I should keep using my pencil. So if I look at this one, this had a lowercase version. It was like this, and here's my trackpad drawing. Sorry.
You are,
Oh no.
I noticed that you are a type designer. I mean, I cannot pull that.
I know. Wow. Okay, so that's the lowercase. That already existed in Unicode. That's great and pretty easy. We can just say, here's the evidence that it's needed. That's easy. But the hard case was this situation because there is a Greek lowercase letter that both Heiltsuk and a lot of Salishan and Wakshan
Mm,
languages used for decades because they could use the Greek script lowercase lambda character. The Greek character, though, has, of course, a capital pair already, the capital Greek lambda. And that's all good, but the problem is that when you try to uppercase this character, no matter what Unicode would be able to do, you can't actually cross a script boundary. So the Greek script can't have a cross like this, basically. So I can't go from here up into a different character. It would create really unstable data, like language, like encoded data, character data, that is. So the solution is to say, let the Greek character be the Greek character with its case pair. That makes sense. It should stay that way for stability. And it's going to be better for the Heltsa community and any other Wakshan or Salish and language community that wants to do it, to have a new character that will correspond always to this character in the case pairing data. So that's the solution that was developed in conjunction with the script encoding committee at Unicode. That was the major thing that we need to get through. When we were able to do that, what we basically did, so Nahinga and I, with support from Mark, a lot of support from Mark and Bridget, and Clarissa wasn't on our team for this particular initiative just yet, but if Clarissa was, she'd be joining in with this effort too. We prepare the drafts of the proposal. So we write that proposal up. I'm going to circle it here. First step is, oh, sorry. Here we go. We write that proposal. And then after you've gone through your drafts, you've got all the evidence, we prepared the case, and then the Unicode script encoding committee basically gives their blessing to say, yes, this is a great candidate now. It goes up to a Unicode technical meeting, and this is the docket number right here, L223191. That means that this thing was registered, and it went up for review, and it was accepted. Yay! Then, what you don't know, though, here's a wall again. What you don't know is that, okay, Unicode says, yes, this is a great candidate, and we're going to implement these 3 new characters. But what we don't know is, well, and what version is it going to make it into? At the time, it was, when we proposed this, Unicode 15 was coming up, and it was in the summer. So Unicode releases every September of every single year, usually. In the pandemic, it didn't release at the early stages of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, that is. And, but otherwise, every year, once a year. And it wasn't going to make it into 15 because they had just accepted it and it was locked. But what we did is we actually made a separate 1-page proposal to say, because the Heltsa community is their language is endangered. The other thing that I wanted to mention too, Heltsa and many First Nations Inuit communities face is that if you don't have enablement to the access to your language, they're all working very hard to keep the language not just alive, but to revitalize it. You can't, like, when you meet these kind of significant roadblocks, it always funnels people to the other majority language. English is the big one, and in this case, French as well to a limited, and Spanish, I'm sure, could fall into that category depending on the geographic region, because these are the major dominant languages. It's not about like whether they're like what we might think of those languages that are European based, but it just happens that because they're so well supported, people will use them instead because they speak it anyway. But if the language is going to be revitalized, you need to have the infrastructure there. So it's so critical to be able to kind of push these characters along. And Unicode's script encoding members said, if you make a proposal to explain why this case should be pushed ahead, it's possible that it can be expedited, because they were thinking that it wasn't going to make it in until 17.0, which would have been like 2 years after this successful acceptance. And Unicode characters can actually sit in the pipeline. So it made it into the pipeline, but they could sit in the pipeline for years. So what we did is we advocated for it, and they were confirmed to go into this version. So September, 2023. I think it was 2023, or maybe 24. I'm losing track of dates at the moment. But what's important is that it was as soon as it could possibly get into Unicode. The tricky thing, though, is that the characters are now published, and big companies like Apple, Microsoft, Android will eventually support them because they aim to support the Unicode standard, and they might have the character data implemented each year because they'll implement support. But if the core fonts on the system do not represent the language, or sorry, do not represent have support to render those characters, then there's nothing that anybody can do. They'll still not be supported. So, like for example, this is a diagram I like to show when we think about this situation. So we did all this work together. Community collaboration. By the way, the Language Commission signed off on the proposal too. Like we went through a really careful process to say this is everybody was on board, and everything was correct. 26 July 2023. There's my dates. It was accepted by Unicode. So the 2nd of
Hey,
November. Yeah, here we
26th
go.
of July. That's my birthday. That's a great day.
Happy birthday. Belated birthday. Yeah, well, that's a even more reason to celebrate. And then so Unicode, it was accepted to push into Unicode 16. That was awesome. What we actually did is we were not doing the work under a memorandum of understanding, but at that point, but we decided, hey, there's a lot of work we can do together. And so we actually wrote a memorandum of understanding, a protocol agreement to do more work, like build keyboards, build fonts, roll the new characters out. We delivered those keyboards and fonts. We helped the community with technical implementation. In 10th of September 2024, Unicode 16 comes out. The characters are in there. But here's the blocker, is that once we get to this stage, we can provide the resources. It's into Unicode, but we cannot do anything about when they will get picked up and by the big tech companies. And so what we can do is we can prepare everything. We prepared the video messaging so that everybody in the community even knew that, hey, there were new characters available. There are new tools. What is Unicode as well? Like, and why does it matter that the characters were added there? But as of today, like this recording, the characters are still not available. So what I see is, I'll see something like this, which looks kind of funny. Actually, I need to switch my color just a second. Is this going to be, yeah. So right here, you see these script characters, and that's because we issued a script font for the community. That's where we might get into talking about typographic things, but we issued a script font, and the macOS cannot find a font that supports this character. It will look for, if its core font doesn't support it, it'll look for another font that does have a character that or a glyph representation. And so that's what you see here. Is that it just happens that the script font is called Dash, and it's the first alphabetical. It's in alphabetical sequence. It's the first font that supports it. So it's a funny thing, but what it proves is that the macOS core font, perhaps the Windows font as well, Android, do not actually have a rendering support for these characters yet, and it's 2026. And so we have, prepared issue reports to make it aware, like, could we request support update to the font? But when we get beyond that point, we can't actually do anything once we've made those requests. So that's kind of like where the bottleneck exists, is you do rely on those companies to come through with support, because we can do things on a third-party level. And we still continue, like we don't let it stop the research work that our team does with the community, but we do, in terms of wider enablement, it will be really great once, and it will happen eventually, where the macOS will support these characters, iOS.
We are almost there to finalize, and I have so many questions,
Yes.
but I don't want to let you go, because this question for me, it's critical. Like,
Okay.
you're often acting like as an intermediary between communities, and like even institutions or organizations, like how you can actually finance this work, but also like how you can like uh build like a bridge between the communities and the work that you are doing.
That's a wonderful question. I think about it a lot. It's really important to the work that I do, because as I mentioned, as a person who is trained in a European, I mean, well, I grew up, if growing up as an English speaking person in Canada, I grew up with a European worldview, even though I'm Canadian North American. So I'm always having to challenge my assumptions about design, about technology, also thinking about a position of privilege, having grown up that way. Again, I take for granted that I can spend so much time thinking about design and technology and not just thinking about like how do I even access my language, or do I have to learn my language in order to even engage um, with cultural heritage, or with also design from a, let's say, a First Nations perspective, um, which is something we could have a whole nother podcast or several talking about First Nations design, traditional design and technology. Just look up birch bark canoes, and like that's a wonderful example. But what I'm always doing is I'm always understanding this kind of reciprocal process of when I'm working with a community, I need to speak with community members,
Mm-hmm.
and I need to have a dialogue when I notice something, not to make an assumption of, oh, I automatically think that when I see a problem and I investigate it, I think, okay, we could do this, this, or this. But I have to like sit with that for a moment and think, okay, what I need to do is document this carefully and go have a conversation with, it might be elders, language commissioners. We have a conversation with our research team first as well to talk about things and what would our recommendation be, what and what are the expectations. So something I learned the first proposal I did, which was back in 2020, was having speaking about all these technical factors and also the timeline that I was sharing with you. I made sure to have a really careful conversation, and we did, with Nahingaino and her team, uh, and the community, about realistic expectations about when can we expect access to these characters.
Mm-hmm.
So I know the process, but it was really important, and this is why we made the video, which I'm going to. I think the video is a really helpful thing on so many levels. I'm gonna,
Yes, if you can put it over there so people can enter to the
yeah.
file and see
So
later.
here, I'm popping this. I wonder if the video will just drop in. Oh, okay. Well, if you click on,
Yes.
yeah, if you click on this link, the video is the first thing you see. And watch that video. It's 3 minutes. But we made this video for the everyday community member who's a language user to understand this is the work we did, and this is why we did it. This is how Unicode works. And this is when you can expect to have tools to use. But we also can't tell you exactly when those big tech companies will implement support. And it was really important for us to go through this process of having that kind of level of conversation and messaging, because we wanted everybody to have realistic expectations of when they're going to get access to the tools. Um, and to just know that we're still here and we're going to be here through the whole process, and we'll be working to advocate on behalf of your language as much as we as much as we can. In the meantime, we'll keep working together, but we can't do anything ourselves. Like, we can't do the heavy lifting about that blue area of the timeline that you saw. So what I'm always doing is I'm thinking about stuff like this, like, don't leave community members in the dark. And that goes with technical stuff too. Like, I was showing you that diagram of how the digital text chain works. Like, what is my responsibility on the font design end? What should a keyboard do? And what is the Unicode side of things? And we basically explained that, those three layers, to every community that we work with, so that they can understand that, oh, this is actually what's going on under the hood. This is what a font is responsible for. This is what your keyboard is responsible for. And then at the Unicode side, Unicode's responsible to maintain all these characters. Um, Now, when it comes to graphic things, um, I want to pop this up because it relates to this timeline. So what we did is we actually had an event. I wasn't able to join. Mark was able to go, but we had an event at their big house where they actually showed the video that you can watch to the language commissioners and members of the public. So there was a viewing of this, and what it did is it explained the work that we did to the community, and it was a kind of like it was both a celebration of what we did and a kind of point to let everybody know that this is what's going on with Healthsuk language, and we're doing work to have it be healthy for the future generations.
This is
Um,
something that you can actually continue a language in the digital world, in the now and the
exactly.
future.
Yeah, exactly. And the things that we think about too are things like um, I have to think a lot about um, I'm trying to find some stuff. Like I ask questions like this because what we did is when we were successful, and Hingano and Nevada is another person, Nevada Collins, that I worked a lot with on this process. She narrated the video. Um, and what we did is we spent a lot of time looking at sketches about like they've never had a script font for their language, and this is a good case. I could take this line where I said, here is how this should look. I'm a font designer. I'm just a designer, and here's how I think it should look. Um, but I don't think that's the right way to go about it, and that's not my way to do it. My way is to ask questions like I showed my sketches in my sketchbook, like I'm going through the process of writing their characters in a script or a cursive style, because that's the font we were working on together. And I knew that, uh, like a lambda letter, this letter that you see here, or this glottal stop, there's no really example of how this should connect like a cursive letter. And this one too, like a Greek lambda letter, looks very different than this in cursive. In fact, it looks unintelligible to First Nations readers, and that's understandable because their cursive writing that they have from their elders looks more like something like this, where it retains more of its typographic shape. So we went through this process of actually going back and forth and looking at both sketches and proofs of examples. And we're doing a lot of this work right now with a couple of communities where we're challenging how should something typographically look in the Latin script from that European design heritage. How can we kind of move that and adapt it to the First Nations culturally appropriate graphic representation? The Unicode's not changing, but the skin of the characters is changing to suit the local community's preferences. And so what we ended up actually arriving at was a suite of fonts that were informed by, in fact, so, okay, really quick, this will be more visual. What we did is we went from here and we arrived at this final font where it actually gives them this script font they've never had before. They were very, like Nevada and Hingaino were so excited to get access to this. And now they even use it for teaching kids handwriting in the local school, which is exciting. And what it did is it actually gave us a new suite of fonts that were informed by this process of working together and talking about how should the comma mark look. Really quickly, like asking questions like, where should the comma, like how should it look? I'm going to pop something else in here. Should it look like this top one or the bottom one? And it was clear that it should be this ball and tail form because it's more clear that it's that glottal. It changes the character to a glottal stop or glottalized character. And asking other questions that some people might not ask. At like our team and Typotech generally, we want to know these things because we want to make a font that people actually want, not that they just want to use, but that it will represent their language appropriately and accurately. So like I remember asking Nevada and also Rory, who's another language speaker in the community, should that comma sit nested on a character that's has an ascender, or should it sit above the stem? Unicode would give you this, number 2, as a standard, but locally they would expect that this is more comfortable to read, this version on number 1, and they chose that. So this is the kind of stuff that we can now document, and the community's happy once everybody's agreed on it. There's been a democratic consensus on it. We can actually make it available so that other font makers, so that can be everybody from Apple to Microsoft to Google's Android, so that their fonts can represent text at a standard level this way, but also like any other type foundry, because we can't make all the fonts. We don't want to
Hmm.
make all the fonts. But what we want is to have this meaningful impact to the field, where we want to have this meaningful impact to communities so that they're going to have their language work properly, be represented typographically properly, to give them more options. But also we want it so that like any other type company can also prepare a font, because they may like some, like a health community member might say, for my brand, there's this font made by a company in um, like Argentine, like an Argentinian type foundry. There are wonderful type foundries there. They want to make a font to support the language, and then they can do that because they know how.
This is so amazing to finalize this chapter of this
Yeah.
episode, like giving like this entire project a whole purpose of like continue languages. Thank you so much, Kevin, for open your file and be I mean, I will use this word, but I think it's important, vulnerable, to actually showcase your process. I
Mm.
think that is where we actually understand the process and learn from your process. Thank you so much, Kevin, for being here and open your file.
Oh, you're so welcome, and muchas gracias.
Thank you so much to everybody that is actually looking to this amazing recording with Kevin Kin. So if you want to actually, I don't know, like start interacting with the file, you know where you can find it. And thank you so much for being here. Have a great day y será hasta la próxima, amigos.